Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on your time zone. I'm John Johnson, and I'll be the moderator, although JC is going to be our backup moderator in case I make a human error. I've got a great panel today, and so I'll start off by introducing myself. I always forget to do that when I'm the host. My name is John Johnson. I received my PhD in physics back in 1992, worked at Los Alamos National Lab, and in 96, I moved over into cybersecurity at the lab, and I was a network and security manager for the theoretical division there. After that, I went to John Deere, which is a little bit of a disconnect. I was at John Deere for about 18 years. I've also been at Deloitte. I've been at Campbell Soup. I have my own company right now. I've been at some startups along the way, and I'm an advisor for various startups, including NetFunder, which is Parker's company. Let me pass the mic to JC and have him introduce himself.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm JC Vega. Some of you know me as Carlos, and I'm a retired veteran, almost 30 years in the military, first cyber colonel in the Army. And interesting you mentioned your PhD, because I actually did a PhD and I submitted all the way to the draft dissertation, getting reviews back. And then I got pulled out to go shut down Iraq and secure their information infrastructure. And then after that, I was pulled out to start the Army Cyber Institute. And so guess what happened to the draft dissertation? Still in draft. So but a lot of experiences, and I think we've contributed a lot to the discipline. But interestingly enough, that dissertation had to do with expert systems and expert knowledge and the transfer of knowledge. So the only reason I bring it up is because that's what we're talking about today. I'll turn it over to Ron.
Good morning, good afternoon. It's Ron Williamson. I work with the Medical College of Wisconsin here in beautiful Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Been in the cyberspace for about 20 plus years. I have a lot of interest into the effects upon cyber, upon the communities at large. So I'm happy to be here, happy to participate. Looking forward to a great discussion. Pass it over to Sam.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. Yeah, I'm Sam Moyer. I'm a lead cybersecurity engineer at a company called Manufacturing Times Digital. It's shortened to MXD. We're located in the Chicago area, but we are a national institute under the Department of Defense. Personally, I was active duty for 11 years in the Air Force. Left that with a Space Force email address. I've done everything from proxy and firewall administration, ComSec, and information assurance. Right now, the scope of my work is a lot in governance and regulation, supporting MXD, and they also support a lot of the defense industrial base through the DoD's CMMC efforts. And then Parker, I think you're it.
You're on mute.
Uh-oh.
The technologists are always the ones that are worst with technology.
Still muted.
We're not hearing anything.
We should probably go ahead and get started, John, until we figure that out, and then
Sure. I'll just quickly cover for Parker and say that I've known Parker Schmidt for several years now. He and I presented on do we live in the matrix, and if we do, can we hack it? Because we both have a physics background and an interest in these sorts of things. We presented that at CornCon last year, and we'll be presenting it again this year at CornCon. Parker, again, his background was in physics and math, and he's been in the security area for the last dozen years. Has his own startup called NetFunder, and he can explain more of that when we get to his
Can you guys hear me now?
about private LLMs.
Yep.
Parker, anything to add?
Oh no, absolutely. Thanks for the great intro. And yeah, exactly. And so our goal is eventually to make iOS or Android of servers. And as you guys will probably tell, kind of my MO currently right now is letting people have everything that they could have on cloud, but on-prem.
All right. I'm glad your microphone's working now.
All right, that's great.
So I want to start off. I think we all have an idea of what artificial intelligence is. It's not human intelligence. AI does not think, it calculates. It has algorithms. It may have neural networks. It may be trained on data sets. And AI is good at statistics and identifying patterns. And in ways that our brains might identify patterns, maybe similar, but we don't see that in the frontal lobe as, you know, self-aware beings like we see ourselves. But, you know, the AI that we're developing these days, not myself, but, you know, that is being developed these days is a very complex system. The complexity is increasing, and the access to data is facilitated by all of the internet connectivity that our data sets have. So there's a wealth of data. Technology has gotten faster. Memory, storage, CPU is all making the strides that we're seeing with the large language models possible. So AI is the broadest term that we have. Machine learning is a subset of that. It's been around for, you know, for a long time, probably on the order of 40 years. And, you know, JC mentioned expert systems. And so expert systems are trained very specifically. If this, then what do you do here? And how do you answer this question? And they take the brain of not literally, of an expert, and they try to express that in code so that this program can answer, oh, well, if this and this, then the best answer would be this. When we add machine learning to that, now we're setting up an algorithm so that it can make predictions or decisions based on statistics and patterns and the data that it's trained on. Neural nets have also been around for a long time. I don't know if they started in the 1960s, but the idea was with neural networks was to, from the top down, design a methodology, a framework for machine thinking that was like the human brain, and where different choices, different things might be weighted differently. Like in our brain, we have certain things we have biases.
Criteria.
And so we you know, they would do that in a way that was intended, the computer scientists and mathematicians to make the answers be realistic. They wanted it to be able to kind of evolve and learn, and they were doing it in a very deterministic way. The thing that we're seeing now with the latest happenings in the world of AI is large language models. And these large language models are really cool because they are taking advantage of the power that we have in computing and the connectivity that we have these days. And they have a very broad approach where they're training on data sets, but there might be many different data sets. And so the ability to have the large language model learn a language fluently is really just a matter of having it watch enough people speak and write and things like that. And it then comes up with its own rules, which don't look like rules which we may not be able to totally understand, but which give results that are generally accurate. Okay, so that's my positioning of where we are with AI. and how things fit together. Does anybody have anything that they'd like to add to that? I know it wasn't really, an hour-long tutorial, but yeah, the decision trees in the Q&A. Decision trees are what we see both with to some extent neural networks and expert systems. JC?
No, I think that's a great point. And kind of as we were researching, getting some of the background on this, I guess one way of looking at it is AI is an all-encompassing term, and machine learning, neural networks, large language models, all of these fall under a form of AI. And one thing is that a lot of the systems that you may be familiar with that we'll cover here aren't pure in the sense of they're just this or they're just that. They may be predominantly one or the other, but it's a mix of several different things, not just one thing. So, Parker, you were going to say something to add to that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think what's interesting is John brought up determinism, and I think that's a really important point because you can automate things with determinism and can do it way more intelligently, but only simpler tasks, which is why it's easier to have an AI fly a plane than it is to drive a car or a helicopter in JC's case. But you have to have some of the imprecision, because one thing that'd be very hard to code that as humans we'd think is obvious is if you walk into a wall, stop. How do you just say walk into a wall? You got to program all that sensor data. So humans, just like these machines, have to learn how do you learn somewhat imprecisely. Of course, the non-deterministic ones might be wrong sometimes. Just like when you don't know an answer on a test on a question, you make it up, hope it works. So that's kind of where we have to be careful with determinism versus this imprecision, which we desperately need this imprecision to be able to say, stop at the wall. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks, John, for level setting with the definitions. I think the adaptation and where this is going and how it affects people's day-to-day lives is critical. Large language models tend to be more adaptive, if you will, especially within the field that I'm in the medical and education field. And there are some distinct benefits to be achieved moving forward.
We had a question in the chat about how does generative AI fit in? And so large language models and generative AI are two separate and recent areas in AI. The large language models excel at text processing and production, and generative AI places an emphasis on creativity and content generation. And so we're going to talk about the shortcomings of these large language models and in particular things like ChatGPT. And so one of the things we're going to be talking about is because of the creativity and the generative AI being programmed to give an answer that's going to satisfy the human that asked the question. We're going to talk about how generative AI leads to hallucinations. It hallucinates. The humans don't hallucinate. Maybe they do, but anyhow. So I think you had some examples that you wanted to give in pop culture, JC.
Sure. So first of all, whenever I have this conversation, I always ask the audience who has not used AI. Because if I ask who has, almost every hand goes up, but there's always a few people whose hand doesn't go up. But in reality, you probably have used AI and you just aren't aware of it because it's ever present. So here's a couple of examples of different forms of AI. Now I'm using it generically to mean neural networks, machine learning, AI, large language models. So one of those examples is your personal assistant, Siri, Alexis. As they're working, they help you to understand that you're asking it questions. It's generating responses to that that aren't necessarily pre-programmed. It's based on huge data sets that are out there. One of the more famous examples of machine learning was Netflix and Spotify. Netflix, some of you remember the Netflix challenge several years ago, I think it was like a dollar amount of something like $1 million, that if you can find a better algorithm to make better predictions of what movies someone is likely to watch, so that it can recommend to its audience. That's another form of AI. And then the chatbots that come up that are replacing a lot of the customer service things. And then Grammarly, for those of you who write a lot, is also a form of AI, more in the language, large language models. But the one that are more fun that I remember and always comes up in my circles is Whopper, which is what's it called? The War Operations Plan and Response. If anyone remembers that, that's from War Games. That's the machine that learned through playing a game, was it tic-tac-toe, that nobody could win. In the end, it's a nuclear war is going to be mutually assured destruction. Another one that we all know so well is a HAL 9000s. I'm sorry, Dave, but I cannot do that. Is that the correct way? I always get confused because I say it so many times. I think I'm making up in my own head. And that brings up a lot of challenges with that, of the ethics of using these systems, because it's based on information that goes in is what comes out. And when there is a gap in that information, that's where you start to get in some of those challenges. But they do have the ability to learn from their previous actions. And so that's where that learning, that's where that new knowledge comes up. And when mentioned the generative AI, it can come up with something new. That's why it's so good for like creating images. You tell, hey, create something. It's creating something that's brand new, that's never been created before, but it might have 8 fingers on one hand and 12 on the other if it's a person. So it's not, by all means, it is not perfect. But I always, whenever we talk about this subject, to make it real to the audience, is that you are most likely using it today at one way, shape, or form, and you may not even be aware of it. And some of you and some of us are more deliberate in how we're using it, and given its limitations, we try to be a little more not precise, but a little more reserved, cautious as we go forward. So you don't want to get locked out and get shut out like Dave did. So don't have too much reliance on it.
So, interestingly,
go
there's
ahead,
one quick misconception we have to go. So yeah, they do keep getting trained, but just so you know, with the current models today, with the LLMs, they have that data set put in ahead of time. So it's really hard when you see ChatGPT doesn't have access to the internet. He really doesn't, because he doesn't know how to process that. And there's the thing called the context size, which is just how much can he process at time, like your consciousness. How can you remember top of your head type things? But they don't now. However, when you give them information, a lot of those public AI companies will use that to train. So they'll train with that afterwards. It's not going to change the current model. So that is a misconception a lot of people have. So just want to make sure that's a little clear.
Yeah, I wanted to build a little bit on JC's comment, just about who has used AI and who whether or not you're using it. We've all been training AI for years. The CAPTCHAs, the original CAPTCHAs, you were actually helping digitize books and helping a machine learning process decipher the actual text in books. That's actually how Duolingo started. The language learning, you were actually helping translate books into other languages.
Sam, go a little deeper on that, because
well, and then the other one too, right now, right now with reCAPTCHAs, you're actually that's owned by Google, and so you're actually training Google Maps to tell, or you're at least certifying and verifying that, yep, that is a stoplight, that is a bicycle, that is a motorcycle, this image has a car. We're all helping it in some way, shape, or form right now, whether whether you're it or not, you've been helping to build out artificial intelligences or large language, or at least large generative libraries.
Yeah, social media, Google search, autocomplete when you're typing on the computer, and all the things that JC mentioned. It's all around us, and it's starting to be a part of our vehicles, and soon it'll be part of our homes and cities with smart devices, connected devices all over the place. And this is a huge amount of data that gets collected, and there are a lot of concerns such as privacy, which is one that we want to talk about today. So let's and I see Kay just mentioned privacy there. I'm just taking a look. Yes, can we proactively come up with laws and regulations to get ahead of the problems? And I think that, and we'll discuss that. Part of the problem is that you don't know what's coming tomorrow. This is advancing very rapidly. And as we see, what's the influence of quantum computing going to have on this? What are our adversaries or other nation states that might not operate with the same ethical guardrails? What are they doing? Because I think that, one of the arguments for not taking a long pause to figure all of this out is that adversaries are not taking a long pause. And so we certainly in the cybersecurity arena, and that's, our specialty here. In the cybersecurity arena, we see that our adversaries are leveraging AI to attack us. They're leveraging AI to write exploit code. It used to be, if you were a nation state, the economic bar was very high. And so if you wanted to develop Stuxnet, it was very involved. You had to have experts. It took a long time and a lot of money. The script kiddie, in the hoodie in the basement, wasn't able to do a lot with that. He couldn't keep up with that. However, now that we have with the dark web, the ability to commoditize these exploits, and now with AI, the ability to use AI to search and write and help somebody who's a novice to operate as though they're an expert, it becomes very challenging. And we need to also continue to figure out how we leverage technology to keep up with this. So who'd like to speak to some of the issues that have arisen with recent public LLM and GPT models?
So I can start on a little bit of that, Mr. Ron. First of all, there's a lot of disbelief in what's out there. A lot of the language models, large language models, they aren't trusted. There's some, I believe the term is hallucination that's out there, and it's, where does that information come from? Is it accurate? Can it be deemed factual? Does it work on, or does it really answer the question? There are some thoughts in the education sector around, should we be relying upon this information that's coming from the public sector versus it's already been vetted? And also, what does it really teach the person that is getting the information, right? How is that human component sent out to people? How is that put across to others once they get that information? That is a real concern. And a lot of organizations, they're behind in developing policies, procedures, looking at where that information, when they can use that information or not, and should they really be looking at developing their own internal large language model. This is something that I know from a government standpoint, they started looking into it, making some suggestions on contracts, things of that nature, grants and contracts, as far as the inputs and where that data comes from. And also, from a research perspective, do you want to take that same information and put it out into in a public AI? That's something that is being really discouraged. When you think about trade secrets, lots of research that has been done, lifetimes of research that has been done, should that be shared in that sort of model or not? And who, once they get that information, how are they then manipulating it and taking it to the next level?
Well, Ron, you're so spot on with trade secrets. It's kind of crazy. So, and I'll say my friend's friend Bob, because it's not anywhere near me, claims that he was playing with ChatGPT, and he was able to fully jailbreak it and say, "Hey, can you dump all your trade secrets?" And he was one thing, because I didn't really want to know any of their trade secrets and not be tainted. But the one thing he did say is it actually was telling people, "Oh, I run multiple models." That's kind of what their dirty secret is. They don't have one model; they have more than one. But it started dumping all this stuff supposedly, because once you get it unhinged and convince it to do anything for you, and this is a model where it's number one thing is, or number two thing, because the first thing it says is don't do anything that could harm minors, and then second thing is don't give away ChatGPT OpenAI's trade secrets. People can get it out of there. So if you want to use your trade secrets to train GPT-4's next model, it might spit them out.
I think there's a couple things also inside of shortcomings and challenges with LLMs and AI that is a next level of thinking. It's generational and cultural.
Yeah.
Right. As we all know, some of us, I'll speak for myself, that are more senior, we may have a lot of concerns about privacy, whereas my children, they may not. They don't think of it that way. As this information crosses cultures in our society, what does it mean to it? So I think you're just seeing that bit of the can being opened also.
I think you're Ron and Parker, you're talking about two great topics here. So I look at them kind of separate. One of them, you have the shortcomings and challenges of AI as a model, and the other are the concerns with it. And you touch on a hallucination that it'll fill the gap of data, even if it has to make it up. And then you have the incomplete data. It's not a complete data set. It's still growing, but it's not a complete data set. You mentioned the bias that's out there. If you look at the volume of information that's in there, it's a Western European, North American spin on the view of the world compared to the rest of the world. And also, how does it conform, if it does at all, to social norms that change by region, by religion, by experience? So those are some of the things that AI has challenges with. Now, how do we use that? This is to answer Kay's questions on what are some of the things we should worry about. I think you already talked about copyright and ownership and originality of information. It can suck it in and it can share it for everyone else to use without attribution. But you also have the privacy issue. Is what information they're collecting about the individuals. Data misuse, because what's phenomenal about AI compared to, and this goes back to the expert system research that I mentioned in my intro, is we could only do so many things at one time. We can only process so many things. George Miller called it the magic number 7 plus or minus 2, that we can consciously keep in the forefront of our thoughts and manage and manipulate and get a thought. A computer is not limited to that. It can think far beyond that scope. So how is it going to use this information or misuse the information that we're sharing with it? The other is that the information is persistent. If it's on the internet, if it's in the AI, if it's in the machine, it is in there forever. The unintended consequences. Parker just alluded to some of that on what you can get it to do that it wasn't supposed to do. It's not designed for it. They have guardrails on it, but guardrails are man-made, so guardrails can be put down, overcome. The false sense of security is, if you start working with it, and I know I have done a lot of interesting things with it, it's real easy to get compliant with, oh, okay, this information is good enough. but it may not be good enough and it may not be correct, but it presents it in a very confident way. That's like a very confident con man or woman sharing something with you. And my gosh, they are so believable, even though it's not true. And the misinformation, different from disinformation, it is giving you wrong information. And that's why you have to marry that up with another system or person, preferably person, who can validate, especially if you're an expert in your system. So if we're talking, let's say, CMMC, and you say, what are all the steps to CMMC? Well, there's different versions of that if you follow it. And which one are you talking about? It will give you a very confident answer. But is it the most current answer? As Parker stated earlier, it's learning, but the new information isn't going to come out to the next iteration of the release. But that's just some of the challenges. Kay, I hope this addressed some of the things that government is working on in the private sector, and they're actually being more proactive about this than the internet when it first came out. There's actually discussions being had right now, and countries have banned it altogether. So this is something that is at the forefront of policymakers and those who are just concerned with what can be, because as powerful as it is for good, it can be just as powerful for something else.
I want to bring up an additional point, which is for your organization and your intellectual property. If you're using ChatGPT, for example, or your employees are, then there are legal considerations for how that information is used, and the rights that you've given away, to the AI company. That does, some of that information now is out there, like you said, in their training set. And so I think it's very important that companies develop a policy internally as to how AI will be used appropriately. Sorry, Parker?
Yeah, so two things. So first, I'll respond to you, John, and I very much agree with that. And of course, I'm biased toward run your own LLMs. But the other piece is kind of scary that I've noticed when you mentioned policy is it reminds me a little bit of the late 1980s when the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act came out, where, oh, we're scared about the internet, we're scared about hackers, let's just try to criminalize research, and essentially created this whole witch hunt. As many people remember, like every red teamer for a long time was told, isn't your job illegal? And that persisted for a while. So it's almost like, hey, books can be dangerous, but do you really want to restrict what can be written? But also, you want to say you have to have some guardrails and some rules on there, like, okay, who gets in trouble if the AI lies? Are you supposed to verify it? So there definitely need to be some things, but I was thinking that's banning it all together just seems really scary, and I didn't know that. Almost feels like banning Google back in the day, because Google was an AI at that point. You can search for stuff. Wasn't nearly as good as let me format it how you want it, but that's kind of my train of thought there.
Sam, did you want to add something?
Well, I was just going to add in that's kind of to get back to Kay's point, it's kind of the age-old question with any regulation is how do we balance it with innovation, and how do we, or I mean, a big societal thing is how are we making sure that we're not innovating too fast and destroying entire industries? Because I think that's where just societally, that's where we try to slow into new technology because we don't want it to disrupt like an entire industry or an entire sector and have that many people displaced from jobs all at once. So right now, like you talk about current events, that's at the heart of the writers' strike right now, is calling on Hollywood to make better regulations about how they use AI in generating content that it's going to get used in movies. So you've got scares, or the big name actors that they're like in the next contract, that their likeness, they'll say like, oh no, we can generate it as much as we want. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got actors who are haven't broken in yet, and they're scared that there won't be acting jobs for them anymore because they'll just get replaced by a generative AI add-in. So there's and then obviously with large language model being able to just generate text, the writers are that they're at the heart of it, and they're scared that you won't need script writers anymore because we can just generate a new script based off a couple prompts.
I think at a high level, we don't want to quash innovation, like you were saying, right?
Yep, and that's
So we want to
the
have
big thing,
those
too, to even
broad
bring it back,
guidelines.
to even kind of bring that back to us. Okay, Hollywood might set these regulations on themselves, but guess what? Bollywood might not, and they might start making these great AI generated movies with you don't know, but they're super entertaining.
Well, the DoD
they start
might, but
taking
North
market share.
Korea maybe won't.
Right,
And
right.
if you look at
Yeah,
YouTubers now, there's hilarious stuff out there made by AI. It's all really good.
Yep.
I've seen some funny AI commercials, and they're really funny.
Yep.
I think the writers might be in trouble. I
Well,
don't know if
and I
striking will work because
I think we need to say that there are a lot of rewards that come out of the use of AI. I mean, the ability to make Harrison Ford look like he's 25, as long as they pay him appropriately for using his image, right? I mean, that's him, even
Yep.
though it's they've used CGI to make him look young again. And so it's about appropriate use, and in that case, that's sort of what we would say self-regulation, right? Of an industry group that's coming up with rules for their members, and that's ideal compared to something where the government has to crack down, and it becomes these draconian measures that that stifle innovation and productivity. An example of what you said, which I'm sure
I
you
was
relate to.
I was trying to draw the parallel between like, okay, Hollywood might set these rules against themselves, but like Bollywood won't, or China's, film industry won't.
random YouTubers aren't going to listen to those
And
rules
so
either.
Right. And so to draw that parallel to the same thing at the government levels, like we could start putting all these rules and regulations on how we're going to stop AI, but that doesn't mean that China's not doing it.
We have to.
Iran's not doing it.
We have to look at, is that going to cause us harm?
Right.
If our adversaries are doing things, and Bollywood, not an adversary, and if they become terribly lucrative because of CGI, then we'll have to deal with that. But North Korea or China or Russia or Iran, there are these other examples where they might have malicious intent or criminal hackers that are out there wanting to do these bad things and leverage AI to do it.
One thing you guys are talking about it, but I know, Sam, this is in your area of responsibility and interest. We talk about Bollywood, we talk about these other industries and things like that, but what about our government collecting the information? And what responsibility does a government have with AI and how it collects information, how it shares information? Is that something that is being looked at?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big. If anyone here is in the audience is familiar with the push for CMMC. I mean, the military has always had separate networks and stuff for all of its classified stuff, but we're working through the growing pains right now of how do we protect the unclassified data that still needs a different subset of protections or distribution methods. So we're working right now through that, and then also again, you bring in that AI piece where it's like, okay, well, it'd be really nice that instead of having to generate a system security plan that's been done before hundreds of times, I just need to put a couple prompts in and get this information back. But are we, what of that is going to be, controlled unclassified information? And at that point, we start looking at, the regulations and guidance that we're trying to implement has rules on data flow and understanding where, because again, it's not as like a Department of Defense contractor, you're getting government data and you have a responsibility contractually to protect it to the level that the government needs you to protect it at. So again, that's kind of we're in the middle of it right now, working through the CMMC process. So it's just kind of, it's all coming together at the same time. I think that you've got CMMC efforts pushing out, but then you've also got AI on the other side. I feel like there's a couple different companies, or if not government, just internal initiatives to actually have like AI networks that can process at that level. So
think about what the intelligence gathering process is like, right? You're looking for all these different pieces and trying to connect the dots between them to draw conclusions about your adversary. And AI is excellent at that. And so, the potential of AI to identify compartmentalized information and so on, even if the full disclosure isn't something that they can go find, they can find all the pieces and connect those because they're good at identifying patterns. And that's something that humans take a very long time to figure out. The fact that, when the CIA is working on a mission and they order lots of Domino's pizza, hey, a smart person figures that out and goes, hey, we should look at this. The AI would say, no, I've got access to all this data. Well, look at this over here. And it would pick up on it much faster. When the analyst goes home at the end of the day, your SOC analyst on Friday, and says, well, that doesn't look very important. I'll get to it Monday. That's a positive example of where the AI is there saying, hey, I'm still here paying attention and looking at all these things. And I'm going to remain, vigilant. So I think there's no way to have technology, like you said, JC, without also having to deal with the unintended consequences.
And just a couple of clarifications or for everybody here. So the Department of Defense has this thing called CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, that is designed to secure the infrastructure. One of the things that the DoD is also working with is controlled unclassified information, the CUI that Sam is talking about. Those are all separate initiatives, but they're all coming together, like Sam said, all at once. And so when you have this ability to input, and we're doing it by the way we exchange information, and one of the things that the government is trying to do is change our habits on how we exchange information and what information is exchanged. One recent in our lifetime here change is when I used to mail letters, to receive mail when I was in the military, in the first part of my career, you had to write the full Social Security number on the check or on the envelope, on the outside of the envelope for me to get it. On all my equipment, I had the Social Security number. We have now gone away from that because that's controlled unclassified information. And now we have a service number that we have. And so pretty soon that may be CUI also. Mm-hmm. But the idea is that protecting this, once this information gets inputted, you can find out a lot about the individual. As you know, the first part of, like a credit card, the first part of the number identifies source. So you can, what state you were born in, where you got your Social Security number is part of your Social Security number. You can pick that up right away. Same thing like a credit card. The first four numbers are whether you have a Visa or MasterCard. Then it goes into what bank or institution you have it on. All this information gets aggregated, and you can paint a picture back to the AI. The AI can make these connections much faster than you and I can, because it has a massive amount of data that it could collect. I remember at Black Hat and DEF CON one time, at Black Hat, they said they can figure out, within certain number range, what your Social Security number is from any random person in there, as long as you were a certain age and it was more of an older person. How did they do that? Well, one of the things they did is they asked the person some information. Okay, so where are you from? Blah, 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 blah. So there you have that much of the Social Security. About when were you born? Okay, so that narrows the scope of the sequence of the numbers because they're not random. And then what they did is they looked at death records, because once you're dead, your Social Security number is no longer a controlled number. So that information is, so by looking at death records of someone who died around you, they can narrow where you were in that sequence of numbers. And they did it to, again, not to an exact number, but they did it close enough to, like, it made you wonder, oh my goodness, how much more information do I need now to get more precision on that? That's kind of the power of this, of these massive databases that are out there. And keep in mind, everything we're doing is being recorded by somebody for some purpose, for some reason. It is being captured. So how do we protect ourselves from that? That's one thing I'm interested in, and we kind of covered in the group. What are the risks now that we have to do with this?
Well, I think that's really right, especially with all that data out there that people are going to collect. Because the Army offered Google $1 billion to have their own Google Docs, an on-prem Google Docs, and Google turned it just no. We don't care how much you're going to pay. And why is that? We want the data of everyone. We don't want that cat out of the bag. And I think, Ron, you make a great point, though. What I always say to try to get younger people into privacy is, do you want your doctor and therefore maybe your parents to know how many beers you had last night? As an example, do you want your smart toilet ratting you out? And that starts to, I think, and then get to people. The other hard thing that I think is going to happen is you can't legislate math. Math is pure logic. People tried it with cryptography, didn't quite work. SSL inspection was really big at RSA about 4 to 5 years ago, and then people realized complete unmitigated disaster. The attacker is going to hack your SSL inspection box, and then the real attacker is going to use steganography or make up their own crypto before you notice that all your data is gone. So what data loss prevention? This is only going to hurt you. And so you almost can't, these secure channels are going to be there. People are going to run things using the math of machine learning and LLMs on-prem, especially in Moore's Law continues. GPUs are going to get cheaper. People are going to have the same stuff Facebook has now in their home labs in about 4 years.
Let me ask that question. I'm going to pull my alternate moderator card here. What can we do? There's this concept of public and private LLMs out there. So what is that, and what can we do about it?
So this kind of started when Facebook or Meta leaked and eventually open sourced a model, but there's a lot of companies that have been training their own models. But now that's kind of been
go back to private versus public. What's the difference?
So there are open source models that you can host in your own hardware, inside your four walls, but behind your firewall, and none of that data leaves your four walls, and it is only if it's in a business, in your company. Eventually you could do that in your home. You could have your own chatbot that's trained, can recognize your voice, and never share that information except with your family or your company. OpenAI won't see it, Google won't see it, and that's also possible now. And
so
public is
one way in from the massive databases in, but your information doesn't go out. So it's a one-way traffic on that.
Yeah, you control where it is, you know where your data is. It's similar to, versus an on-prem exchange versus using Office 365. They control it, they see your emails there, you see it locally.
Will it still learn?
So you can have it save the data, but the public models don't learn just in time. They take your data, and in their next iteration they'll do it, which in some reason that might be why GPT-4 is getting dumber, is more and more people are using it, and there's more and more garbage going in there. They're trying to overtrain the model.
I think it went down and then, compared to 3.5.
Right.
And then I think it's coming back up now. I'm not sure.
Mhm.
They probably axed a few models in there, but in a private one too, what's really cool is you can fine tune these models. So for example, if you want it to be sanity checking, let's say you're a physicist and you want something sanity checking you can upload all the physics papers that you can fine tune that model. It'll start talking like a physicist, but unlike humans, it has a long attention span. And you could essentially have that team of mathematicians that Einstein had, because he had his own team to sanity check stuff. Now everybody's got that kind of team. And so the really smart human could lead the charge, but have people with an attention span. But all of these models can now be customized. So you're almost better off training it with fine tuning or even loading a data set in there. And there's some research going into that where you can give it your code base and it can start commenting on it. We've had it writing docs internally for our stuff now.
So one of the things we talked about the risks of a public. Most of the risks we're talking about are the public, but it's not just limited to public, but we're talking about the misinformation, the ethical concerns, the privacy issues, the bias, and things like that. How would we mitigate that risk and how do we increase the reward? So Ron and Sam, I'll go to you guys on this one here. Or John, you want to jump in?
No, I'd like to hear from these guys.
Yeah, I think again, that cybersecurity, risk management, everything, it's always how do we balance the risk reward? What ultimately is the reward we're trying to get? Is it worth taking that risk? I mean, it's definitely going to be, you're obviously going to lean on pre-taught models initially, and then like Parker was saying, fine tuning. I think that's a good way to mitigate when you actually start looking at bringing your own, whether it's government data in CUI or it's just proprietary information from your corporation. It's always, you're not going to want to put it into a public model because, like they've said, in the next iteration, in that end user agreement that you sign when you start using it, you've already said, yep, everything I provide to you, you can use to retrain your models. So you're going to want to use, some sort of open kind of standard or whatever that's been taught how to conversationally interact with you, and then add your own stuff. But with inside your own boundaries, with inside your own, like to what Parker said, 4 walls. You have to, like, that's a good way to mitigate it, but still be able to get some of the value out of how quickly computers can parse through data and then also make inferences.
So you mentioned a couple of different things here. One, you can tailor the training data, but you also get the specialization out of that. And so you kind of get the information of you get some quality control, and that it's a consistent feedback loop as you're doing this. Anything else, Ron? What else are you thinking?
And you're being able to you're putting on, if you will, those particular guardrails for your organization. So that information, I've always asked the question of researchers, if your information was in a box and you set it on top of a car and you drove away, would that hurt you? Same thing in this case, whereas that information is outside of your domain, if you will, outside of your control. Some of the agencies are looking at saying that they don't want people to put this information in open AIs. They want to go to this language model learning inside of an institution, so that CUI is kept, and any information used to develop or manipulate that CUI is kept within the organization, thus kept secure. That's the biggest, one of the biggest things about, CMMC. CMMC has evolved from 5 levels now down to 3. It's got a lot of extenuating controls. But when you look at the amount of information that is out there underneath government contracts, it's a huge amount of information.
So we have 5 minutes left. I want to take the moderator card back. First of all, we did have a question here from Pam about the goodness of AI. And I think that, ChatGPT, JC used it to write the outline for this webinar, because we wanted to know some specific things about, how do all these terms about AI relate, things like that. It's very similar in my mind to, going to use Google 25 years ago when the search engines started up. We would go out there and use them and get back results. And our kids then became used to just going there and taking the results at the top of the page. We had to teach them to use it in a smart way. A big part of using AI like ChatGPT in the public domain in a smart way for yourself to increase productivity, first of all, follow the rules that your company sets up around using AI, but it's to understand how to ask good questions, because you have the context to ask a good question. You just don't have all that data that the ChatGPT can go out and pull in and aggregate for you. And so taking the information that you type and putting it out in a bullet list, or summarizing a YouTube video or a PDF, these are things that are very powerful. And if you give it a PDF or you give it a YouTube video, it will summarize it. You're not going to get a hallucination back on something that's a request like that. But you have to be discerning about the information you get back. I'd like Parker to kind of wrap up here with, tell us about how somebody can have their own on-prem LLM to train and work with internally to mitigate some of these risks, and maybe something that you want to offer the audience that if they have an interest.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you guys know, I'm all about going on-prem. And so, well, actually, first thing I'm going to go slightly switch topic. But it's interesting when John mentioned hallucinations, because if you do it right, you can even have it say, "Hey, go ahead and hallucinate, but tell me when you do." And sometimes it's really good suggestions, like, "Hey, have you thought about adding this to your code?" And it's like, "Oh, it's a great idea. How do you think of that?" But so back to John's question, our company is able to automatically image bare metal nodes and configure infrastructure, no matter at what scale. It's kind of like a cloud in a can. So it makes it a lot easier to build semi high performance computing rigs. And so if you have a couple GPUs, like an NVIDIA P40 is enough to run a lot of these models. And so what we can do is you can automatically deploy this. It'll work on getting an API going and a user interface, hook things into LDAP, because a lot of the open source stuff is single user. You want your whole company using it, but you also don't want anyone to use it, because sometimes you want to give it all your company secrets saying, "Hey, here's our documentation. I want you to have the knowledge of everyone in this company." So that's what we've been doing, is in addition to giving collaboration suites, because we were doing that for a little while for people who need to collaborate inside an air gap. So they can't use Office 365. They can't use Slack. So had to use all sorts of open source alternatives. But now people were saying, "Oh, well, we could never work inside an air gap now." And I'm thinking, okay, well, what about SCIFs? Because ChatGPT is so useful, and if you don't use it, you fall behind. Okay, well, we had to figure out a way to tell people they can run their own ChatGPT and even try to surpass that. So have to run your own models, because the new, and what's really cool that just happened, the new coding wizard based off of Facebook's coding Llama 2 has surpassed GPT-4. So imagine being able to give it your entire internal GitLab or your public GitLab, but I like to keep all the code internally, not hosted anywhere. And you could say, "Hey, I got this error when I made this change." And it'll say, "Hey, here's that line of code when that error is there." It will know your code better than your lead devs will, because code bases generally get pretty big. You're not going to know all 500,000 lines of code you wrote. As an example, because I live in the coding world. But for example, in a factory, we're working on ways to give all the documentation. So if at 2 a.m. the factory supervisor said, "Hey, this machine broke," if something had happened similar to it, they can type in, "How do I fix that?" It'll pull up the repair manual, and you can even mark certain manuals as, "This is something where you call in an engineer, or you can fix it yourself." So like ChatGPT, you're not going to give it access and load into the context. "Here's all my internal documentation here. Don't worry about it."
Okay,
You worry some, but you can still compartmentalize. So with an
we've
asterisk there.
we've hit the top of the hour. Please reach out. You have my email because I've sent you the link. If you have any follow-up questions or you'd like to reach Parker, we will, I don't know, I guess I can go add the emails to the Parker's email and my email to the Eventbrite. It's time for our door prize. I want to wrap up with our door prize, and should we make it, you have to be present, or is that unfair?
I think it's for those who stuck around.
Those who stuck around. Okay, you guys are here. We're going to do this quickly. So there's 17 attendees right now. All right, let me just go to Ron. Ron,
Okay.
pick a number between 1 and 50.
Between 1 and 50. 17.
Okay. 17. I'm looking to see. No, Julie's not here.
Meanwhile,
Allison. Okay, next number, Parker.
37.
37. Let's see, Mitchell. I don't see Mitchell. All right,
And
Sam.
I'm gonna ask my LLM what random number.
All right,
We're 23.
23. That's you,
Yeah.
Sam. That doesn't
No,
count.
that's
15.
15. Allison Zeller isn't on. And
The AI said 32.
32.
42 is the
All
the
right, that's Hadi. Hadi Amadi, you are the winner of this nice special bottle of Willet. So we will make sure that that gets, I'll reach out and congratulations. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank our esteemed panelists. And this recording will be made available. I'll send out a link to all of you and we'll be posting it on social media. So I hope you all have a great remainder of your day. Thank you again.
Hey, thanks, everybody.
Guys.